The moment my wife poured a glass of Cabernet Sauvignon down the front of my white dress shirt, an entire ballroom learned who they thought I was. 7 minutes later, they were about to learn who I really was. The red wine spread slowly across my chest, warm at first, then cold against the fabric. A few drops landed on my tie before sliding toward the polished marble floor beneath my shoes. For a second, nobody moved. Then came the laughter. Not loud, not explosive. Worse, the kind of laughter people use when they think they're witnessing someone being put in his place. I stood there in the center of the Grand Regency Ballroom in downtown Chicago, surrounded by crystal chandeliers, floor-to-ceiling windows, and some of the most influential executives in the Midwest. More than 300 guests filled the room. Lawyers, investors, senior managers, board members. Everyone dressed like success. Everyone holding a glass worth more than the shoes I appeared to be wearing. Across from me stood my wife, Olivia Brooks, 40 years old, vice president of sales, the rising star of Halcyon Dynamics, the woman everyone in the room admired, the woman I had been married to for nearly 12 years. She lowered the empty wine glass and smiled. Not a nervous smile, not an apologetic one, a smile of complete confidence, the smile of someone convinced she had all the power. "Maybe now you'll stop embarrassing me," she said. A few people exchanged uncomfortable looks, but most stayed silent. Nobody wanted to challenge the woman responsible for closing the biggest deal in company history. A $100 million acquisition scheduled to be finalized later that evening. The deal everyone had spent months celebrating. The deal that would supposedly secure Halcyon's future for the next decade. I looked down at my ruined shirt. Then I looked back at Olivia. My voice stayed calm. Calm enough that a few nearby guests stopped smiling. "Are you sure you wanted to do that in front of everyone?" I asked. She folded her arms. "What are you going to do about it, Daniel?" Around us, conversation slowed. The room seemed to lean closer. I could feel hundreds of eyes watching, waiting, judging. Most of them had already reached their conclusions years ago. To them, I was Olivia's husband, the quiet guy who showed up at company events, the man who never talked business, the man who drove an aging pickup truck while his wife climbed the corporate ladder. Some believed I was retired. Others assumed I had failed somewhere along the way. A few probably thought I lived off her success. People love simple stories, and Olivia had spent years helping them believe that one. At the front of the ballroom, a massive digital display cycled through promotional graphics celebrating the acquisition. Company logos glowed beneath elegant lighting. Champagne flowed. Servers moved between tables carrying silver trays. Everything looked perfect. That was the funny thing about expensive events. The prettier the room, the easier it became to hide the cracks. Richard Holloway, Halcyon CEO, appeared beside Olivia with a polished smile. He placed a hand on her shoulder. "Let's all relax," he said lightly. "Big night tonight." Several people chuckled. The tension eased. Olivia accepted another glass from a passing server and turned her attention back toward the crowd, as if the incident were already over, as if I no longer mattered. I adjusted the cuff of my stained shirt and glanced toward the enormous windows overlooking the Chicago skyline. The city lights shimmered against the dark water of Lake Michigan. 20 floors below, traffic moved through the streets like rivers of white and red. Everything looked normal, stable, predictable, but appearances can be dangerous, especially when they're built on assumptions. My phone vibrated once inside my jacket pocket. A single message appeared on the screen. The sender was someone very few people in the ballroom would recognize. I read the words once, then twice. Confirmation received. They are moving forward tonight. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Across the room, Olivia laughed at something Richard said. She looked happier than I'd seen her in months. She had no idea what that message meant. None of them did. But for the first time all evening, I smiled. The ballroom recovered quickly. Expensive people are good at pretending uncomfortable moments never happened. Within minutes, conversations returned, champagne glasses clinked again, and a jazz quartet near the stage resumed playing as though nothing unusual had happened. The only visible evidence was the stain across my shirt and the occasional glance sent in my direction. I walked toward the back of the room and accepted a glass of sparkling water from a server. The young man offered an apologetic smile. I thanked him and moved beside one of the tall windows overlooking the city. From there, I had a perfect view of the celebration. Olivia stood near the center of it all. She belonged there. At least that was what everyone believed. She moved effortlessly between investors, attorneys, and executives. Every laugh seemed perfectly timed. Every handshake seemed calculated. Every compliment fed the image she had spent years building. Tonight was supposed to be her victory lap. The acquisition would make headlines across the industry. Business journals would feature her photograph. Podcasts would invite her for interviews. Industry conferences would ask her to speak. For months, she had talked about what came next. Bigger responsibilities. Greater influence. A seat at the table where real decisions were made. I watched her raise her glass, while several investors applauded. Richard Holloway stood beside her looking proud, almost fatherly. If someone had walked into the ballroom at that moment, they would have assumed they were looking at the future leadership of Halcyon Dynamics. They would never have guessed how fragile the entire picture really was. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "You handling that all right?" I turned and found Nathan Pierce approaching. Chief Operating Officer. Expensive watch. Expensive suit. Expensive smile. The kind of man who always looked comfortable because he assumed every room belonged to him. "I am fine," I said. He nodded toward the stain on my shirt. "Rough night." "Not really." His smile tightened slightly. "Olivia is under a lot of pressure. You know how these events can be." I studied him for a moment. Nathan was not here to check on me. He was here to measure me. To see whether I was angry. Whether I would create a scene. Whether I might become a problem. "She seems happy," I said. Nathan glanced toward Olivia and laughed. $100 million can do that. Then he lowered his voice. "Between us, after tonight, everything changes." There was something interesting about the way he said it. Not excitement. Confidence. As though he already knew the outcome. As though the deal had been decided long before the signatures. "I suppose it does," I replied. He nodded once and walked away. I watched him join Richard and Olivia near the stage. The three of them formed a small circle. Their conversation looked casual, but something about it felt rehearsed. Familiar. Comfortable. My phone vibrated again. Another message. The investigation team had attached new documents. Financial transfers. Internal communications. Authorization records. Pieces of a puzzle that had taken months to assemble. I did not open the files yet. There would be time for that. Across the ballroom, a large digital clock appeared on the presentation screen. 43 minutes remained before the official signing ceremony. The crowd saw a countdown to celebration. I saw a countdown to revelation. And for the first time that evening, I noticed something else. Olivia was not looking at the investors anymore. She was looking toward Richard. The expression on her face was not admiration. It was expectation, like someone waiting for a reward she believed she had already earned. 29 minutes remained on the countdown clock when I stopped looking at the ballroom and started looking inward. Funny thing about success. Most people think it arrives with headlines, private jets, and your name on the building. The truth is usually quieter. Sometimes success looks like a warehouse with a leaking roof. Sometimes it looks like a folding chair and a secondhand laptop. Sometimes it looks like a man everyone has forgotten. 22 years earlier, Halcyon Dynamics had occupied 600 square feet of rented industrial space outside Milwaukee. We had 3 desks, 1 unreliable coffee machine, and enough cash in the bank to survive maybe 4 months if everything went right. I still remembered the smell of fresh paint on the walls and the sound of delivery trucks passing outside while I worked 18-hour days trying to keep the company alive. Back then, nobody wanted to invest. Nobody believed in our software. Nobody believed in me. But that never bothered me. I had never cared much about recognition. I cared about building something useful, something that would still matter 20 years later. 1 customer became 3. 3 became 12. 12 became hundreds. The company grew slowly at first, then all at once. Every milestone felt impossible until it happened. New offices, new contracts, new markets. Then came acquisitions, partnerships, expansion. Eventually, Halcyon became one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the country. The strange part was that the larger it became, the less interested I became in standing at the center of it. I had seen what power did to people. The attention, the politics, the endless need for validation. None of it appealed to me. So when the company reached a point where professional leadership made sense, I stepped away from public operations. The ownership structure changed. Trusts were established. Layers of legal protection were built. Most employees never knew my name. Most executives assumed ownership was spread among institutional investors. That assumption had survived for nearly 2 decades. And tonight it was about to become a problem for several people. I looked across the ballroom again. Olivia was speaking with a group of investors near the stage. She looked confident, polished, admired. There was a time when seeing her succeed made me proud. When we first met, she was ambitious but grounded. We spent weekends sharing takeout on apartment floors because neither of us owned proper furniture. We celebrated small victories together. A promotion, a new client, a better apartment. The woman standing across the ballroom barely resembled that version of herself anymore. Somewhere along the way, achievement had turned into status. Status had become identity. And identity had become hunger. My phone vibrated once more. This time it was an email. I opened it. The subject line contained only 4 words. Final verification complete. Attached were documents I had been waiting months to receive. Internal communications. Authorization chains. Records connected to the acquisition. I scanned several pages. Certain names appeared repeatedly. Richard Holloway. Nathan Pierce. Others followed. Then one name appeared again and again in places it should not have appeared. Olivia Brooks. I felt no anger reading it. No shock. Just confirmation. The pieces were finally fitting together. Across the room, the countdown clock dropped below 25 minutes. Guests applauded as another promotional video began playing on giant screens. Images of growth, innovation, leadership, the future. Everyone watched the presentation. Nobody noticed the man standing near the window, quietly reading the truth. The more I read, the clearer the pattern became. Most corporate scandals begin with greed. This one began with patience. Whoever designed it understood timing. Small approvals that attracted no attention. Routine authorizations buried inside ordinary reports. Financial recommendations that appeared reasonable when viewed individually, but formed a very different picture when connected together. I scrolled through another document. Then another. The names remained the same. Richard Holloway. Nathan Pierce. Olivia Brooks. The acquisition was being presented as a transformational opportunity for Halcyon Dynamics, but the internal communications suggested something else entirely. Certain assets would be transferred after the transaction closed. Specific voting structures would change. Executive authority would be consolidated. Compensation packages would expand dramatically. Most shareholders would never notice. Most employees would never understand. The language was technical enough to hide the truth in plain sight. A round of applause pulled my attention back to the ballroom. The promotional video had ended. Guests were returning to their tables, while servers refilled glasses and cleared plates. 20 minutes remained on the countdown clock. 20 minutes before signatures turned intentions into consequences. I slipped my phone into my pocket and studied the room again. The atmosphere felt different now. Not because anyone else knew what was happening. They did not. It felt different because I finally understood the destination they were racing toward. Richard stepped onto the stage and adjusted the microphone. The room gradually quieted. He welcomed everyone, thanked investors, praised the leadership team, and spoke about innovation, vision, and growth. The audience rewarded every sentence with polite applause. He was good at this. Confident, polished, convincing. Looking at him, it was easy to understand why people trusted him. Then he invited Olivia to join him. The response was immediate. Louder applause. Wider smiles. Several guests even stood. Olivia accepted the attention gracefully. She always had. Her speech focused on teamwork and commitment. She thanked employees, partners, advisors, and stakeholders. She thanked nearly everyone in the room. Listening from the back, I noticed something else. Not once did she mention the people who built the foundation beneath the company she was celebrating. Not once did she acknowledge the history that made this moment possible. Success often creates a dangerous illusion. People begin believing they are responsible for every brick in a building they merely inherited. Olivia finished speaking and accepted another wave of applause. Her eyes swept across the ballroom. For a brief second, they landed on me. There was no warmth there. No embarrassment about earlier. No regret. Only certainty. She believed she had already won. My phone vibrated again. This time it was not a message. It was a call. The name on the screen belonged to a senior attorney from a law firm that had represented my interests for nearly 2 decades. I answered. Everything is ready, she said. The board representatives have arrived. They are waiting downstairs. I glanced toward the stage where Richard and Olivia were shaking hands for photographers. Good, I replied quietly. Then let us give them a few more minutes. I ended the call, and looked up at the countdown clock. 17 minutes remained. Around me, guests continued celebrating a future they thought was already secured. None of them realized the evening was about to become something very different. 17 minutes can feel like a lifetime when you know something that nobody else knows. I remained near the windows while the celebration continued around me. Laughter drifted through the ballroom. Glasses touched. Cameras flashed. Every person in the room seemed focused on the future. The irony was that most of them were celebrating a future that would never happen. Olivia stepped down from the stage and immediately found herself surrounded by executives and investors eager to congratulate her. She accepted every compliment with practiced grace. Watching her, I found myself remembering a different version of the woman I married. Back then, she measured success differently. She cared about effort, integrity, building something meaningful. Somewhere along the road, those values had been replaced by something else. I could not pinpoint the exact moment it happened. Maybe it came with promotions. Maybe it came with recognition. Maybe it happened so gradually neither of us noticed until it was too late. I remembered the first time she questioned why I refused public interviews. The first time she asked why I never mentioned my business background to her colleagues. The first time she seemed embarrassed by my old pickup truck. At first, the comments were harmless. Small jokes, casual observations. Then the jokes became criticism. The criticism became disappointment. Eventually, disappointment became contempt. She began introducing me differently. Not as a founder, not as an entrepreneur, not even as someone with experience in the industry. Just Daniel, her husband, the quiet man who stayed out of the spotlight. It was easier for people to assume I had done nothing than to imagine I had chosen silence. My phone displayed another incoming message. This one came from the investigative accounting team. I opened the report and reviewed the final summary. The acquisition contained provisions that would trigger a restructuring immediately after closing. Executive authority would shift. Certain oversight mechanisms would disappear. Several individuals stood to gain substantial financial benefits. The numbers were impressive. The ambition behind them was even more impressive. They had planned everything carefully. What they had not planned for was ownership. Ownership changes every equation. Across the ballroom, Nathan Pierce checked his watch. Richard Holloway spoke quietly with a group of attorneys near the signing table. Olivia appeared relaxed, confident, victorious. The three of them looked like people standing on the edge of a mountain they believed they had conquered. They had no idea the ground beneath them was already moving. The countdown clock dropped to 14 minutes. A new presentation appeared on the giant screens highlighting projected growth over the next 5 years. Revenue forecasts, expansion plans, strategic opportunities. The audience applauded at all the right moments. Then I noticed movement near the ballroom entrance. 3 individuals entered quietly. They were not dressed like celebrities or powerful executives. Most guests barely noticed them, but I recognized each face immediately. Senior legal counsel, independent board representatives, people who never attended events unless something important required their presence. They paused near the back of the room and exchanged a brief glance in my direction. No words. No gestures, just acknowledgement. Everything was ready. I slipped my phone into my pocket and straightened the cuff of my stained shirt. The wine stain remained visible across the white fabric. Earlier it had looked like humiliation. Now it looked like a reminder. A reminder that people reveal their true character when they believe there will be no consequences. The clock continued counting down. 13 minutes remained. 13 minutes. That was all that remained between appearance and reality. The ballroom lights reflected off crystal glassware and polished silver accents, creating the illusion that everything was exactly as it should be. Success has a way of disguising danger. The larger the celebration, the harder it becomes for people to notice the warning signs. I remained near the back of the room while guests continued mingling around the signing area. Richard Holloway looked relaxed. Nathan Pierce looked confident. Olivia looked triumphant. Together they projected certainty. The kind of certainty people display when they believe every variable has been accounted for. Unfortunately for them, they had made one critical mistake. They assumed ownership was a technical detail. Over the past 6 months, I had watched small inconsistencies emerge across internal reports. At first, they seemed insignificant. An unusual recommendation here. An unexplained authorization there. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. But business rarely collapses because of one large decision. It usually collapses because of 100 small decisions pointing in the same direction. The acquisition proposal had been the first major warning sign. The financial projections looked attractive. The strategic narrative sounded convincing. Yet the structure underneath told a different story. Certain safeguards were being removed. Certain approval mechanisms were being bypassed. Certain individuals would gain extraordinary influence immediately after closing. None of that happened by accident. I remembered the meeting that first raised my suspicions months earlier. Olivia had returned home unusually excited. She talked about accelerated growth, transformative leadership, and a new future for the company. The words themselves were harmless. What caught my attention was what she did not say. She never discussed customer value. She never mentioned employees. She never talked about innovation. The entire conversation focused on power, position, control. At the time, I said nothing. Sometimes the fastest way to learn the truth is to remain silent long enough for people to reveal it themselves. And reveal it they did. Internal messages, private discussions, financial modeling. Every new document painted a clearer picture. Richard and Nathan were not merely pursuing a business opportunity. They were redesigning the company's future around themselves. Olivia was helping them do it. Whether she understood every detail no longer mattered. Her signature was connected to too many decisions. My phone vibrated one final time. A short message appeared from legal counsel. Board authorization confirmed. Proceed at your discretion. I read it once and locked the screen. Across the ballroom, a photographer gathered several executives near the stage. Olivia joined them. Flashbulbs illuminated smiling faces. Future leaders posing for future headlines. Looking at the scene, I almost felt sorry for them. Not because they were about to lose something. Because they still believed they had already won. The countdown clock shifted again. 10 minutes remained. Guests gradually moved toward their assigned tables. The signing ceremony would begin shortly. Near the entrance, the board representatives quietly took their seats. Senior legal counsel reviewed a folder one final time. Nobody paid much attention to them. Most people were focused on the stage. Most people were focused on Olivia. That was the problem with attention. It often points in the wrong direction. Richard stepped back to the microphone and announced that the formal signing process would begin in a few minutes. Applause filled the ballroom once again. Olivia smiled. Nathan smiled. Investors smiled. I checked my watch, adjusted the cuff of my stained shirt, and finally stepped away from the window. 9 minutes remain. 9 minutes can disappear quickly when people are celebrating. The ballroom had shifted from anticipation to certainty. Guests were no longer wondering whether the acquisition would happen. They were discussing what would happen afterward. Future promotions, market expansion, new executive positions. The deal already existed in their minds. All that remained was paperwork. Richard Holloway stood near the signing table, speaking with a group of investors. Nathan Pierce reviewed documents with corporate counsel. Olivia moved comfortably between both groups, accepting congratulations like someone being welcomed into a future she had already claimed. I walked toward the center of the ballroom for the first time since the wine incident. A few conversations stopped as I passed. Some people recognized me. Most barely noticed. That was fine. I had spent years becoming invisible. It turned out invisibility could be surprisingly useful. The giant countdown clock displayed 8 minutes remaining. A photographer directed executives into position near the stage. Additional media representatives adjusted equipment and tested cameras. The company wanted the signing documented from every possible angle. They wanted a historic moment. In a way, they were about to get one. Near the rear of the ballroom, the board representatives remained seated. Quiet, patient, watching. Senior legal counsel sat beside them, reviewing the same folder she had carried into the room earlier. The folder never left her hands. Inside were documents capable of changing the entire evening. Nobody paid attention to her. Nobody understood why she was there. Richard spotted me approaching and offered a polite smile. It was the smile people reserve for individuals they consider harmless. "Daniel," he said, "glad you decided to stay." "I would not miss it," I replied. He laughed. "Neither would I." Nathan joined us moments later. "Big night," he said. "The company is entering a new era." "So I have heard." Olivia arrived carrying a fresh glass of champagne. Her eyes briefly moved across my stained shirt. I noticed the faint satisfaction that still lingered there. She leaned closer to Richard. "Everything is ready?" she asked. Richard nodded confidently. "Everything." The answer seemed to reassure her. For a moment, the three of them stood together beneath the ballroom lights. Looking at them, I could almost see the future they imagined. Expanded authority, greater influence, new wealth, new control. They had spent months preparing for that future, perhaps longer. What fascinated me was how completely they believed it belonged to them. My phone vibrated once. I already knew who it was before checking the screen. The message contained only 3 words. We are seated. I looked toward the rear of the ballroom. The board representatives remained exactly where they had been. Calm, ready, waiting. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. 6 minutes remained on the clock. Richard excused himself to prepare for the ceremony. Nathan followed him. Olivia stayed behind. For the first time all evening, we stood alone together. The noise of the ballroom seemed to fade around us. She studied me for several seconds. You have been unusually quiet tonight, she said. I smiled slightly. Have I? She nodded. Usually when people are embarrassed, they leave. I looked at the stage, then at the countdown clock, then back at her. Maybe I am waiting for something. Her expression tightened slightly. Waiting for what? I glanced toward the signing table where assistants were arranging the final documents. The clock dropped again. 5 minutes remained. The truth, I said quietly. 5 minutes remained. The ballroom lights dimmed slightly as the presentation screens shifted to the company logo. Guests began taking their seats. Conversations softened into anticipation. Richard Holloway stepped onto the stage first, followed by Nathan Pierce and several senior executives. Olivia joined them moments later to another round of applause. Cameras rotated toward the signing table positioned beneath the massive display screens. Everything looked perfectly choreographed. Every movement, every smile, every handshake. Richard approached the microphone and welcomed everyone to what he called a defining moment in the company's history. He spoke about vision, leadership, and the future. He thanked investors for their trust and employees for their dedication. Then he invited Olivia forward. She accepted the microphone with the confidence of someone already imagining tomorrow's headlines. The audience responded exactly as she expected. More applause, more admiration, more attention. She spoke for several minutes about growth and opportunity. Then she reached the conclusion of her remarks. Tonight, she said, smiling toward the audience, we begin a new chapter. The room erupted in applause. Richard turned toward the signing table. Let us make it official. That was when I started walking. At first, nobody noticed. Why would they? I was simply the quiet husband crossing the ballroom, the man with a wine-stained shirt and no visible importance. But as I approached the stage, several heads turned. Then more. Olivia saw me first. Confusion crossed her face. Richard noticed a second later. Nathan's smile faded. I continued walking until I reached the edge of the stage. One of the event coordinators stepped forward uncertainly. Before he could speak, senior legal counsel rose from her seat and joined me. The board representatives stood as well. Suddenly the room felt different. Conversation stopped. Cameras remained pointed toward the stage. Richard adjusted his expression and forced a smile. Daniel, he said into the microphone, can we help you with something? I looked toward the giant countdown clock. Less than 2 minutes remained. Then I looked back at him. Actually, I said calmly, I believe I can help all of you. The room became silent. Completely silent. Senior legal counsel handed me the folder she had carried all evening. I opened it and removed several documents. Richard's smile disappeared. Nathan looked toward the board representatives. Olivia stared at me without understanding. Not yet. Before any signatures take place, I continued, there is a matter of ownership that requires clarification. Murmurs spread through the audience. The giant screens behind the stage suddenly changed. The company logo vanished. A legal ownership chart appeared in its place. Rows of corporate entities, trust structures, holding companies, layers built over decades. People leaned forward in their seats, trying to understand what they were seeing. Richard took a step toward the screen. Nathan's face lost color. Olivia looked from the display to me and back again. Then the final ownership line appeared at the bottom of the chart. One name, one individual, one controlling beneficiary. The letters filled the enormous screens behind the stage. Daniel Brooks. For several seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Hundreds of people simply stared at the screen. A champagne glass slipped from Olivia's hand and landed harmlessly on the carpet beside her chair. She never noticed. Her eyes remained locked on the name glowing above the stage. The silence that followed felt heavier than any speech delivered that evening. Hundreds of people stared at the giant screens. Some looked at the ownership chart. Others looked at me. Most simply looked confused. Richard Holloway was the first to recover. He stepped toward senior legal counsel and demanded to review the documents. She handed him a copy without a word. Nathan Pierce moved beside him. The confidence that had carried both men through the evening was gone. In its place was uncertainty. Real uncertainty. The kind that arrives when facts replace assumptions. Olivia remained frozen near the signing table. Her eyes moved between the screen and my face as if she were trying to reconcile two completely different versions of reality. The husband she had dismissed. The man she believed she understood. The owner she never knew existed. The board representatives approached the stage and formally announced that the signing process was suspended pending immediate review of governance concerns, ownership authority, and internal compliance findings. The room erupted into whispers. Investors exchanged worried glances. Attorneys opened folders. Reporters began taking notes. Cameras continued recording everything. Richard attempted to object. Nathan attempted to explain. Neither accomplished much. The documents spoke more clearly than either of them could. Every approval, every recommendation, every authorization, every decision connected to the acquisition would now face independent examination. No raised voices were necessary. No dramatic confrontation was required. Facts have a unique power. They do not need emotion to make an impact. Olivia finally stepped toward me. Her voice was quieter than I had heard all evening. "Why did you never tell me?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. Because I wanted someone to love me without needing what I owned. She lowered her eyes. For the first time that night, she had no response. Looking around the ballroom, I realized something important. The evening had never really been about ownership. It had never been about money. It had never even been about the company. It was about character. Character revealed under pressure. Character revealed when people think there will be no consequences. Character revealed when respect becomes conditional. I looked once more at the wine stain still visible across my shirt. Earlier it had seemed embarrassing. Now it felt strangely insignificant. A temporary mark. Nothing more. The board representatives continued their discussions. Legal teams gathered documents. Investors reconsidered assumptions. The future everyone expected had disappeared. A different future was beginning. I turned and started walking toward the ballroom exit. Nobody tried to stop me. The city lights still stretched across the Chicago skyline beyond the windows. Calm, steady, unconcerned with corporate titles or public recognition. Behind me, conversations continued. Ahead of me, the night felt quiet again. And as the elevator doors closed, I found myself thinking about a simple truth. Real power rarely announces itself. Real power does not need applause. It simply waits until the right moment to stand up. What do you think about Daniel's decision? Would you have revealed the truth sooner, or would you have remained silent until the perfect moment? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories about resilience, hidden strength, and unexpected justice, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next story.